Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The oppressive silence in the cliffside house was a living entity, thick and heavy with the coppery tang of gunpowder and the stark, metallic scent of blood, a sensory overload that seemed to swallow all sound except for the ragged, wet gasps escaping Sheila Carter's lips. Mere moments before, the space had been a cacophony of terror, Luna's frantic, high-pitched screams blending with the deafening, percussive blast of the gunshot, a single, catastrophic report that had torn through the fabric of the night and irrevocably altered every life present. Steffy Forrester stood frozen, her body coiled like a spring, her knuckles white as she still clutched the fireplace poker, a useless, archaic weapon in the face of such modern, brutal violence. Her entire world had telescoped down to the horrifying sight of Sheila crumpling to the polished hardwood floor, a dark, rapidly expanding stain blooming like a grotesque rose on the chest of her garish red dress, the color doing little to hide the grim reality of the mortal wound. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing simultaneously. It felt like both an eternity and a single, horrifying heartbeat since Luna, her eyes wide with a feral, uncomprehending terror, had stumbled backward, the gun clattering from her trembling hands as if the steel itself had grown too hot, too profane to hold. The initial surge of primal, almost electric adrenaline that had flooded Steffy's system, the fight-or-flight response honed by years of being Sheila's primary target, was now receding, leaving in its wake a cold, leaden numbness that started in her core and was slowly spreading to her extremities. This was not how it was supposed to happen. In the countless nightmares that had plagued her since Sheila's latest resurrection, it was always Steffy who was forced to deliver the final, defending blow, a tragic but necessary act of self-preservation, a grim finality she had mentally prepared herself to bear. She never imagined she would be a witness, a stunned spectator to the chaotic, almost accidental demise of her own personal boogeyman, orchestrated by a gentle soul like Luna, a girl who painted with watercolors and whose greatest sin was falling in love with the wrong Forrester grandson. And now, Sheila was dying, right there on the floor, her breath a shallow, rattling whisper, a sound that was somehow more terrifying than any of her previous maniacal rants or venomous threats. Steffy's gaze, wide and unblinking, was locked on the woman who had haunted her, stabbed her, tormented her family, and tried to steal her father, and a maelstrom of conflicting emotions warred within her. A profound, gut-wrenching relief so potent it felt like a physical unclenching of her soul, a sharp, stabbing pity for the broken form before her, and a cold, creeping dread for what this would do to Finn, her husband, the good man who still, against all reason and evidence, carried a fractured piece of filial love for this monstrous birth mother. It was this thought of Finn that finally broke her paralysis, and she took a single, hesitant step forward, her designer shoe making a soft, sticky sound as it met the edge of the blood pool. As if sensing her movement, Sheila's eyes, which had been glazed with shock and pain, suddenly sharpened, their dark intensity finding Steffy's with an unnerving, preternatural focus. A tremor went through Sheila's body, a final, desperate summoning of strength, and her hand, slick with her own blood, twitched, feebly lifting a few inches from the floor. Her lips, now pale and tinged with blue, parted, and a faint, guttural sound emerged, a precursor to speech that demanded every ounce of her dwindling life force. The air crackled with the weight of the moment. This was it, the final confrontation, the last exchange between hunter and hunted. Steffy leaned in infinitesimally, her body rigid, bracing for a curse, a final threat, a twisted declaration of victory from beyond the grave. But the 6 words that Sheila rasped out, each one a laborious, blood-flecked exhale that hung in the charged air, were nothing Steffy could have ever anticipated, 6 words that dismantled her understanding of the last decade of her life in an instant. Tell, my son. I finally understood love. And with that, the fierce light in Sheila's eyes extinguished, her head lolled to the side, and an absolute, deafening stillness descended, a silence more terrifying than the gunshot, broken only by Luna's escalating, hysterical sobs from the corner. Steffy stood rooted to the spot, the fireplace poker slipping from her nerveless fingers with a loud, metallic clang that echoed in the tomb-like silence, the 6 words searing themselves into her memory with the permanence of a brand. Understood love? The phrase echoed in her mind, a maddening, paradoxical riddle. What could it possibly mean? Was it a final, manipulative lie designed to haunt Finn, to poison his grief with a beautiful, unverifiable fiction? Was it a delusional epiphany born of blood loss, a moment of clarity where she genuinely believed her obsessive, possessive, and destructive fixation on Finn and Hayes constituted a form of love? Or, in some twisted, unfathomable corner of her fractured psyche, did Sheila Carter, in her final, fleeting seconds of consciousness, truly believe she had achieved a state of grace, that her violent, all-consuming path had been a warped expression of a mother's love? The relief Steffy had felt moments before curdled into a new, more complex form of anguish. Sheila was gone, the physical threat was eliminated, but with those 6 cryptic words, she had potentially unleashed a different kind of poison, a psychological ghost that would linger long after her body was cold. How would she ever tell Finn? How could she look into his earnest, grieving eyes and repeat a message that would undoubtedly shatter him, that would fuel a lifetime of what-ifs and complicated mourning? The battle, it seemed, was not over. It had merely shifted from a physical war for survival to a psychological war for the truth, and Steffy was left standing in the aftermath, the sole bearer of Sheila Carter's last, confounding secret, a secret that felt more like a curse than an epitaph. The weight of those 6 words, "Tell my son I finally understood love," did not dissipate with the arrival of the paramedics, their frantic efforts a mere procedural dance around a corpse, nor with the cold, bureaucratic efficiency of the LAPD officers who took her statement with detached, professional nods, their eyes already categorizing the scene as just another messy domestic tragedy in a city built on them. As Steffy mechanically recited the facts, the frantic phone call from a terrified Luna, her own rushed arrival, the sight of Sheila advancing, the shock of the gunshot, she carefully excised the core of the horror, omitting those final, whispered words from the official record, sealing them away in a vault within her mind, a toxic secret she now had to carry alone. The aftermath was a blur of stark, fluorescent lights at the police station, the bitter taste of lukewarm coffee, and the crushing relief of Finn's arms around her as he burst in, his face a mask of fear and concern, having heard only the fragmented, sensationalized news reports of a shooting at the Forrester guest house. "She's gone, Finn. Sheila's gone," Steffy had whispered into his shoulder, feeling his body stiffen, a complex tremor of grief, shock, and something horrifyingly close to relief passing through him, and in that moment, the words she carried felt like a physical weight, a lodestone of lies and pain threatening to drag them both down. She couldn't tell him, not then, not when his emotions were so raw and tangled, not when the wound was so fresh. To offer him that cryptic, potentially cruel message would be to hand him a puzzle made of shattered glass, ensuring he would spend years bleeding, trying to piece it together. The following days were a masterclass in public and private performance. Publicly, the Forresters presented a united front of somber resilience, issuing a carefully worded statement that expressed gratitude for the swift actions of the authorities and respect for the complex emotions surrounding the passing of Sheila Carter, a masterpiece of PR spin that deftly avoided any mention of murder, Luna's name, or the grotesque reality of the blood-soaked floor. Privately, the cliffside house was a pressure cooker of silent tension. Luna, sedated and shrouded in a blanket of trauma, was a ghost of her former self, her eyes hollow, jumping at every slamming door or raised voice, the gentle artist now permanently stained by the visceral act of having taken a life, even one as monstrous as Sheila's. Hope, torn between a natural, protective instinct for her young cousin and a dawning, horrified understanding of the danger Luna had been in, fluttered around her like a frantic bird, her attempts at comfort falling on the deaf ears of profound shock. And through it all, Steffy moved like an automaton, tending to Hayes, managing the fallout at Forrester Creations, holding Finn when he wept quiet, confused tears for the mother he never really had, all while Sheila's final mantra played on a continuous, torturous loop in her mind, "I finally understood love." It was this gnawing, unspeakable secret that began to corrode the very foundations of her hard-won peace. Every time Finn looked at her with those soulful, grieving eyes and said, "At least it's over. We're finally safe," she felt a stab of guilt so sharp it stole her breath. He was mourning the idea, the faint, pathetic ember of a possibility that the woman who gave him life could have been redeemed, and here Steffy was, sitting on information that could either validate that grief or twist it into something unrecognizable. Did those words represent a genuine moment of clarity? was Sheila's warped, obsessive desire to be part of Finn's life, a desire that led her to shoot him and Steffy, to kidnap Hayes, to manipulate and terrorize, her version of love? The thought was nauseating. If that was love, then it was a poison, a cancer. Or was it more sinister? A final, masterful act of manipulation from beyond the grave, a seed planted solely to grow into a tree of doubt and pain within her son's heart, ensuring that Sheila would forever be a spectral, complicated presence in their marriage, a ghost they could never truly exorcise because her last words were a riddle wrapped in a lie, smothered in a perverse claim of maternal devotion. Steffy found herself staring at her own son, Hayes, watching his innocent, trusting face as he slept, and a cold fear would grip her. Could a capacity for that kind of love be hereditary? Was some twisted seed of it lying dormant in her husband, in her child? The psychology was insidious, and Sheila, even in death, was proving to be her most potent. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening that was indistinguishable from any other. Finn had been quiet, staring out at the Pacific Ocean, its vast, indifferent horizon a stark contrast to the claustrophobic turmoil in their home. "I just keep thinking," he said, his voice soft and laced with a pain that made Steffy's heart ache, that in the end, she was just a lonely, broken woman. Maybe all she ever wanted was to be loved. To have a family. He turned to Steffy, his eyes glistening. "It's tragic, isn't it? The whole thing. Just a profound, human tragedy." And in that moment, Steffy saw the narrative solidifying in his mind, the tragic, misunderstood figure of Sheila Carter, a victim of her own desperate longing. The sanitized, palatable version of a monster. The words were out of Steffy's mouth before she could stop them, sharp and brittle, shattering the fragile peace of the evening. "She told me something," Steffy said, her voice trembling. "Right before she died. She spoke to me." Finn's head snapped up, his gaze sharpening, all traces of sentimental tragedy vanishing, replaced by a desperate, hungry need. "What? What did she say?" The pressure of holding it in, of watching him mourn a fiction, had become unbearable. She took a shaky breath, the metallic taste of that night flooding back. "She looked right at me," Steffy whispered, the scene replaying in vivid, horrifying detail behind her eyes. "And she said, 'Tell my son.' I finally understood love." The silence that followed was absolute, more suffocating than any that had come before. Finn stared at her, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, confusion, a flicker of hope, and then, a dawning, devastating anguish. "Understood love," he repeated, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "What does that mean, Steffy? What did she mean?" And Steffy could only shake her head, the tears she had been holding back for weeks finally breaking free. "I don't know, Finn. I don't know. And that's the hell of it. We will never, ever know." She had handed him the shattered glass, and as she watched him try to grasp it, she knew Sheila had, in her final 6 words, achieved a form of immortality. The physical threat was gone, but the war for their peace of mind, for the very definition of love within their family, had just begun, and the most formidable enemy of all was a memory, a ghost armed with a perfect, unsolvable riddle. The chasm that opened between them in the wake of her confession was not one of anger or accusation, but of a profound and isolating silence, a gulf forged from the uninterpretable. Finn retreated into a contemplative shell, his warm, physician's hands often still, his gaze distant, lost in the labyrinth of his own lineage. He wasn't pulling away from Steffy, not exactly, he was trying to navigate the psychic minefield his birth mother had laid with her dying breath. He began spending hours in his home office, not working, but staring at the single, faded photograph he possessed of a much younger Sheila, taken decades before her path violently crossed with the Foresters. Steffy would watch him from the doorway, her heart a tight, aching fist in her chest. He was searching the grainy image for a hint of the understanding Sheila claimed to have found, looking for a ghost of the woman capable of such a sentiment, and in doing so, he was inadvertently resurrecting her, giving her a presence in their home that was more pervasive than any of her physical intrusions had ever been. This spectral war escalated at Forrester Creations, where the corporate machinery, oblivious to the private hell of its principles, continued to turn. A new, ambitious junior designer, a young man with a sharp, edgy aesthetic and a disconcertingly intense gaze, presented a collection he called Crimson Epiphany. The designs were a stark departure from the house's usual elegance, jagged hemlines, leather slashed with blood-red silk, and asymmetrical gowns that evoked both violence and a strange, desperate beauty. When Ridge questioned the inspiration, the designer, utterly unaware of the landmine he was stepping on, explained with fervent passion, "It's about a moment of brutal, final clarity. A transformative understanding born from chaos. A love that consumes everything in its path to find its truth." Steffy, sitting in the meeting, felt the air leave the room. It was as if Sheila herself had whispered the concept from the grave. She vetoed the collection immediately, her voice harsher than intended, citing brand inconsistency, but the damage was done. The lexicon of Sheila's last words, understanding, AP. It was a scent that clung to the back of the throat, a mockery of the delicate jasmine notes in Electra's perfume, which now seemed foolish, frivolous in the face of the grim biological verdict about to be delivered. Electra, perched on the edge of a plush leather chair as if ready for flight, wore a mask of impatient arrogance, her designer-clad body a testament to a life built on commanding outcomes and bending reality to her will. She had come here expecting a prescription, a minor hormonal tweak, perhaps a dismissive lecture on stress and age, a mere obstacle to be cleared on her meticulously plotted path to motherhood, a path she saw as her ultimate triumph over the Forrester family, the final, unassailable proof of her belonging that would finally silence the whispered criticisms of Stephanie's ghost. Bridget, clutching the manila folder containing the damning lab results and the stark, grayscale imaging reports as if it were a live grenade with the pin already pulled, felt the weight of her dual roles, doctor and stepdaughter, collide with catastrophic force, her professional composure a thin veneer over a well of personal history and a terrifying, burgeoning pity. "The tests, they're conclusive, Electra," she began, her voice a fragile thread trying to hold back a tidal wave, each word chosen with the painful precision of a surgeon's incision, knowing each one would cut deeper than any scalpel. "The persistent fatigue you blamed on your relentless social calendar, the abdominal discomfort you dismissed as a mere nuisance, it's not stress. It's Asherman's syndrome, a severe, advanced presentation, coupled with premature ovarian insufficiency." Bridget's eyes flickered to the ultrasound images, a landscape of ruin. "The scar tissue from those past procedures you never fully recovered from, the silent, subclinical infections that went untreated for too long. The damage isn't just significant, Electra. It is irreversible. It's a total sclerosis." She could see the first, hairline cracks appear in Electra's facade, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in a perfectly manicured hand that now gripped the armrest, the knuckles bleaching to the color of bone, a flicker of primal panic in eyes that usually held only cool, calculated assessment. Bridget pressed on, the clinical terms feeling like betrayal in her mouth, each one a nail in the coffin of Electra's most cherished ambition. "Your follicle-stimulating hormone levels are postmenopausal. Your uterine lining it's sclerotic, unresponsive. It is medically and biologically incapable of supporting implantation. It cannot sustain a gestation. There is no window, no cycle, no miracle drug, no experimental procedure in Switzerland or Japan that can change this. The door is closed." A silence, profound and deafening, swallowed the room, broken only by the frantic, almost imperceptible hitch in Electra's breath, a sound like a small bird trapped in a sealed room. Bridget leaned forward, her own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, knowing the next sentence would be the point of no return, the words that would sever Electra from the future she so desperately coveted and plunge her into a permanent, desolate present. "I'm so sorry, Electra, but you have to understand this, you have to hear the words and accept their absolute, final meaning. You can't get pregnant anymore. It's not a question of difficulty or a challenge to overcome. It is a biological impossibility." The sentence, "you can't get pregnant anymore," did not simply land, it metastasized, a virulent, swift-acting poison that seeped into the very core of Electra's being, into the marrow of her bones and the fabric of her soul. Her face, a masterpiece of sculpted beauty and artful maintenance, did not crumple into messy, human tears. Instead, it seemed to collapse inward, the delicate architecture of her arrogance and vanity giving way to a terrifying, hollow emptiness, as if her very essence had been vacuumed out. The light in her eyes, the fierce, ambitious fire that had seduced tycoons and toppled rivals, guttered and died, replaced by a flat, dark disbelief that reflected nothing, saw nothing but the void opening up inside her. This was not just a diagnosis, it was an annihilation of self, a revocation of a fundamental power she had, until this moment, taken for granted as part of her feminine arsenal. Her entire identity, a carefully crafted tapestry woven with threads of seduction, strategy, and the unshakable belief that she could control her own destiny, was unraveling in real time, the threads snapping one by one with audible pops in the silence of her mind. The dream, a perfect, beautiful forester heir with her eyes and his name, a child who would be both her greatest, most vulnerable love and her most powerful, unassailable political pawn, a living, breathing tether to the legacy of Eric and the Empire, shattered into a million irretrievable pieces, each shard a razor-sharp memory of a future that would now never be. The phantom cries of a baby that would never exist echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of her soul. The vision of a nursery, all soft lamplight and imported cashmere blankets, of tiny fingers curling around her own, of a first word, a first step, of using that child as both a crown and a shield against the world, dissolved into dust, leaving behind only the cold, sterile reality of the consultation room. All her schemes, her manipulations, her ruthless climbs over anyone who stood in her way, were rendered meaningless, a pathetic, noisy pantomime in the face of this one, unalterable biological fact. She had spent a lifetime playing a high-stakes game, believing the ultimate prize was within her grasp, only to be told the game itself was over, and she had been disqualified from the start by the very body she had so meticulously curated and displayed.